Awesome. What's up, buddy?
What's going on? Good to be here.
How we doing?
Doing well. How are you guys?
Doing well.
Are you marked safe from the conference circuit right now?
Yeah, I'm actually flying to Nice on tomorrow, but it's directly after the conference. So
perfect timing.
Perfect timing.
Nice. So Austin's a junior partner at Dragonfly, former product manager at Arbitrum, and author of numerous hot takes on the timeline. So Austin, I think as kind of wanted to start off just as like a meta kind of view of the market right now. So you're consumer focused at Dragonfly. I guess like what do you make of the market right now? Are you guys seeing stuff you're excited about at like the slightly later stage than kind of we hang out at often?
Yeah, I mean, generally I'm spending time at early stage and late stage. I think like even if it doesn't fit within Dragonfly's minimum check size, I typically love building relationships with founders early on, even pre-product, just so that we have the relationship when they are ready to raise a bigger round. And to answer your question, like yes, I've actually been seeing like quite a few net new primitives recently, a couple of which I've invested in. Can't quite share all of those names at this point. But yeah, I actually think there's quite a few things getting built, like a lot of pre-product stuff. But there's not going to be any shortage of like new stuff to play around with in the next year or so.
Yeah, you able to share what some of the categories that you've invested in recently or excited by are?
Yeah, I mean, one is like just straight social consumer app with like crypto adjacency, not necessarily crypto focused. Another one is sort of a new type of DEX that primarily like runs in a TE, and a bunch of cool things that running in a TE unlocks when you don't have to kind of get hung up on the constraints of running on a blockchain. So yeah, I guess those are a few of the more recent things.
Nice. So you used to work at Arbitrum, so we need your take on this Robinhood chain. And yeah, I'm curious, why do you think they chose Arbitrum, and what's like the broader impact you see this having on the chain landscape?
Yeah, totally. So yeah, first thing I'll say is like, I'm so happy for everyone at Arbitrum and Off-Chain Labs. I do think they deserve it. There's probably two angles here, like why Arbitrum over OP Stack, and then why Arbitrum over say Solana. And so maybe I'll start with both. So with OP Stack, I think the answer is pretty simple. It's like one is just control. Like if you're launching in the super chain, that means your chain upgrades are governed by OP token holders. It's just not that attractive of a model, in my opinion. And then I would say like Arbitrum versus Solana. Look, I think bringing equities on chain is going to be huge, allowing them to trade 24/7. I think I saw some stat that was like the times that the public stock market is open is like less than 30% of all hours, every week. And so there's going to be a lot of volume if they are able to get a lot of liquidity on there. And a lot of volume means a lot of MEV, a lot of priority fees. And to capture that, the best way to do it is to own the stack, to own your own chain, and then own the sequencer, which collects all of those priority fees and MEV. And that's one of the beauties of running a centralized sequencer on a rollup. And so I would say like when it comes to value capture and owning the user experience, it's like some days Solana might be congested. I think like we saw with like the Trump token that like Solana does need to actually still scale throughput. And so having dedicated block space where you can capture the value that you're creating it is sort of the reason for building an app chain over launching on Solana. That being said, I'm not like privy to all the economics and in terms of any partnership. But that's sort of why I think it actually makes sense for Robinhood to build an app chain on Arbitrum.
Yeah, I think that last point is so important because I saw some takes on the timeline, like people that were just mad at Arbitrum or Robinhood not innovating on the chain side at all. And it's like it's not the point. Like, this is just an economically motivated move. They want to provide the best user experience for their users. Like, why would they try to go innovate on the chain landscape where they can just use something that exists, capture sequencer fees, and kind of all the UX benefits that come from it? Like, they have the distribution, they have everything they need beyond that, and this is just kind of a economic and back end replacement for a bunch of the stuff they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, clearly they don't care that much about composability right now, because it's like you can't just go on a DEX interface and trade, like OpenAI shares. Like, you can only do it through their app, and so there's upside and downsides to that. But the upside is like you fully control the user experience, and I think that is like a very underrated point that composability doesn't really allow for.
For sure. So I want to get your takes on two of the big category battles that are happening right now with prediction markets and perps. And I've seen you writing a bit about them on the timeline. So I think starting with prediction markets, you shared a pretty compelling bull case on Polymarket, and I think some skepticism of Kalshi. So wondering if you could dig into that a bit. And also maybe it's like a kind of bonus question. I'm curious why you think Paradigm and Multicoin back the non-crypto competitor in this.
So maybe let me preface that Dragonfly is an investor in Polymarket, and so take my opinion with a grain of salt. But however, I will say that, like, I do think Polymarket is crushing Kalshi on almost every angle. More volume, more open interest, more high quality, top of the book liquidity. I also just think that like for example, with the Middle East conflict, Kalshi doesn't have any markets on the Middle East conflict, and Polymarket is consistently being used as a source of truth for news outlets, for conversations on Twitter. Like, it is the canonical source of truth for the Middle East conflict, and like I think that branding compounds over time. And so this isn't just like one missed news cycle for Kalshi. This is like this is sticky branding that I think like Kalshi can't do, probably because of some regulation reason, but I have no idea. I do think for Kalshi, like, the Robinhood integration is very smart. I think like they are obviously, while Kalshi is the only real player in the US, they should be pushing on that as hard as they can, and I'm sure they are. And I think like if they continue getting more integrations and deeper and potentially exclusive integrations, that could be a very big deal. I think it's pretty clear like why Paradigm and Multicoin backed Kalshi. I mean, they're the only real competitor to Polymarket, and if you're not invested in Polymarket but still are bullish on prediction markets, there's no real other investment to make here.
I mean, these are probably some of the a couple of months ago, the hottest categories for founders to pitch new things in. And I think you probably saw a million prediction markets as well. Yeah. I'm curious, if you were to make a case for where the opportunity lies in, say, net new projects that are excited by skin in the game narrative or prediction markets generally, like, what would the strategic angle that's open there be in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I do think there is like opportunity to build on top of prediction markets, Polymarket, included. I think we saw Ostium, for example, do these things called conditional perps, where like if a prediction market if the odds go above some certain percent, you can automatically or atomically, probably not atomically, but automatically open a long or a short on an asset. And so like, I do think there's a lot of interesting things you can do there with just like conditional perps. Another one is like parametric insurance. And so it's like, we already kind of saw this, like people were like hedging their gas costs by buying or selling shares on like how much oil prices are going to go up due to the Middle East conflict on Polymarket. And I think it was like mostly for jokes, but like it's a very real like use case going into the future. I think like if there's markets for whether certain flights are going to get delayed, or for weather, like there's a lot of different things that you can sort of hedge against outcomes that you would not or would want to happen.
Are you excited by, there are a lot of people kind of taking this more social kind of UGC prediction market angle, kind of recognizing, you can't just go to Polymarket and create a market. So like what happens if you actually open up market creation to anybody? Do you kind of create a weird social context, get a bunch of new weird markets that people want to participate in? Is that an area you're excited by?
Short answer is no. I'm personally like pretty bearish on permissionless prediction markets. I just think like we already see too much fragmentation, and not enough like social authority for prediction markets. I think like Polymarket, for example, is already doing these creator prediction markets where like TBPN and like the all-in guides can create their own markets, and like one, they have the social authority to do that. And then two, like they still have a real oracle. I think self-resolved markets is not attractive. And so like that, like if you can solve the oracle and resolution problem and then also like the social authority problem, then like I think that's fine. But at that point, it's not permissionless.
Yeah, the fragmentation is something that I just think is really difficult to overcome and requires a full different context. And maybe it's not called prediction markets. It's bets with friends or something, right? It doesn't rely on an immense amount of liquidity to be able to actually find truth, quote unquote.
Totally.
Can I go back to the tokenized stocks thing here? Because I think we talked about this for the last few days, and the deeper I dive into it, the more friction I see in this, right? Like the way these things are settled, the weird legal restrictions that are, Liechtenstein, whatever the actual models that allow us to have happened. And I think you're talking about this sort of global 24/7 market. But these assets are settling to a price, like they're not trading. They settle to the price of the stock, and the centralized trading venue, right? Wherever it has been issued. And so there is like, going to be massive spreads and crazy pumps over the weekend into like a big dump on Monday as people settle out at a price that's sort of lower than where the market actually is. Like, is this just such a big opportunity that you think, okay, well, we'll get through that and more liquidity and updated legal structures are going to unlock a more favorable experience? Or do you think that there is just enough demand for this stuff right now that people will just be able to jump through all these hoops and deal with the friction?
Yeah, I'm probably somewhere in the middle. I mean, I think like Rob, one of the GPs at Dragonfly, put out a great tweet earlier today on the challenges that like Kraken's X stocks and Robinhood's model are going to face, and they're very real, very real. I do think like obviously the end game is like native issuance of equity on chain, but we're far away with that for relevant companies at least. And so we kind of have to make do with what we've got. And I think what we've got is still potentially a big deal. If it's, going to be KYC to only people in Europe, maybe like I'm not as excited about that. But I think like with Kraken, we've already seen that like, you can just trade it through a Jupiter interface and like, and people globally can get access to these stocks. Maybe the legal rights don't transfer to them, but like the people buying them don't care. And so like, I do think like there is a world in which even with all of this friction, it's still the only way that you can get access to the asset. And so it's still much better than having nothing. I think it's still very early and we'll actually see like to the extent of how much volume there will be. But I don't think like Kraken and Robinhood go down this route without having at least some confidence that this is going to be adopted by at least enough people to make it worth their time.
Well, my guess is this is more posturing ahead of some regulatory changes, or at least believe. Like maybe it's just staking out the ground today in maybe an inferior experience to what could be as we sort of start to get hopefully more open, permissive regulatory opportunities.
Yeah.
All right. Well, give us, before we let you leave here, like what are the 3 categories you're sort of excited about that maybe the timeline is not paying attention to right now? Your guys got your head in the right nooks and crannies. So super curious, what are you bullish for through the summer?
Yeah. The first 2 that come to mind, one is just like ways to get leverage on long tail tokens. Like we've seen, like even Hyperliquid, you can't. We saw what happened with Jelly Jelly, right? Like they listed Jelly Jelly when it's at a much higher market cap. When it's at a much lower market cap, a lot of bad debt can be created. And so like the fidelity of perps is not really high enough to just list like any long tail asset. And so perps aren't going to solve this problem. But I do think there is still a lot of outsized demand for leverage on these long tail tokens. I do think someone's going to figure it out. And I've seen a couple of teams trying at it, but obviously like the door is wide open. The opportunity is right there. And then the second one I'll say is like, I think we are underrating the extent to which speculation can be harnessed for non-speculative outputs. Obviously, like polymarket and prediction markets are the obvious example of this. It's like on the back end, you have this speculative engine that then creates like this non-speculative output, which is like information about the world and like predictive consensus of what's going to happen in the future that anybody, whether it's just news outlets or normal people who have no interest in speculating, find useful. And I do think like we're seeing that signs of it more and more. I think we're seeing that like with pump live streams, we're seeing like speculation sort of act as the curation engine or the algorithm when people are speculating on the live stream. But I just think there's a lot more there. It's hard to, just put your finger on like exactly what that future is going to look like. But I am very excited about anything that is taking the speculative energy and then directing it towards something that isn't. And I think there's going to be a lot of cool hybrid products that get built like that.
Amazing, man. Thanks for hopping on today. Good luck with your flight and your continued ability to avoid conferences and yet still get some beach time. I love it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, go give Austin a follow. We've got him up here on the screen. Cool. Dude has good takes on the timeline.
Appreciate it. Well, thanks for having me on. It was fun.
Thanks,
Peace, man.
Later.